The Reluctant Bride. The last thing Olivia Winters expected to hear at her family's modest dinner table was that she would be marrying one of the wealthiest men on the eastern seaboard. "It's the only way, darling," her father said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. "Seabreeze Harbor is drowning in debt. The marina, the family business, everything we've built for generations, it all disappears next month unless we secure this partnership." Olivia stared back at her parents in disbelief. The seafood stew before her growing cold. At 32, she had built a life centered around serving their small coastal community, not chasing wealth or status. Her small nonprofit focused on sustainable fishing practices and ocean conservation, passions that had never included becoming a billionaire's wife. Dominic Riviera? She finally managed. The man they call the harbor shark? The developer who's been buying up waterfronts all along the coast and turning them into playgrounds for the ultra-wealthy? Her mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "He's offering to clear all our debts, Olivia, and invest in rebuilding the town's infrastructure. In exchange, he wants a family connection. A business transaction," Olivia corrected bitterly. "Let's call it what it is." The following week passed in a blur of lawyers, prenuptial agreements, and hushed family discussions. Olivia spent her final unmarried days walking along the shore at dawn, trying to reconcile herself to the sacrifice she was about to make. The weight of her family's 5 generations of fishermen and shipbuilders rested on her shoulders. When she finally met Dominic Riviera in person, he was exactly as she'd imagined. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual salary, with sharp features and calculating gray eyes that assessed her like a property he was considering purchasing. "Ms. Winters," he said coolly, extending his hand. "I appreciate your cooperation in this arrangement." "Mr. Riviera," she replied, matching his formality. "I'm doing this for my family and my town. Nothing more." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, refreshingly honest. "Most women I meet are eager to convince me they want nothing but my company." "I'm not most women," Olivia said, "and I don't believe in pretending." The wedding was planned for just 3 weeks later, a strategic timeline according to Dominic's team of efficiency experts. Olivia insisted it be held in Seabreeze Harbor, in the small chapel overlooking the ocean where generations of her family had married. Dominic arrived with an entourage of assistants and security personnel, treating the event like another corporate merger. He barely spoke to her before the ceremony, instead spending time on calls and reviewing documents about his latest acquisitions. On the morning of her wedding, Olivia stood alone by the harbor, watching fishermen prepare their boats for the day, people whose livelihoods she hoped to protect through her sacrifice. She wore a simple white dress, refusing the designer gown Dominic's stylist had sent over. "Ready to sign your life away?" came a gentle voice. Olivia turned to find her childhood friend Becky approaching. "For Seabreeze," Olivia said, forcing a smile. "Just remember who you are." Becky squeezed her hand. "Even billionaires can't buy that." Hours later, standing beside Dominic at the altar, Olivia felt like she was watching herself from a distance as they exchanged vows that felt empty of meaning. His hands were unexpectedly warm as he slipped the platinum band onto her finger, but his eyes remained coolly assessing. At the reception, Olivia moved through conversations mechanically until she escaped to the small garden behind the venue. There she found her 7-year-old nephew building a small boat from twigs and leaves. "Does this mean you'll be rich now, Aunt Liv?" he asked innocently. For the first time that day, Olivia laughed genuinely. "It means many things, but I'll always be just me." From the doorway, Dominic watched this exchange, something unfamiliar stirring within him as he observed the unguarded moment. When Olivia looked up and caught his gaze, her smile faded, but not before he'd glimpsed something authentic that had been absent in all their formal interactions. It was just a fleeting expression, yet somehow, it felt like the first real thing he'd acquired in years. Cracks in the facade. The Riviera penthouse in Boston was exactly what Olivia had expected. A minimalist monument to wealth with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Everything was sleek, gray, and impersonal, much like her new husband. "Your quarters are through here," Dominic said, leading her down a hallway on their first evening as a married couple. He gestured to a door without opening it. "I've had your things arranged. My assistant can help if anything is missing." Olivia raised an eyebrow. My quarters? Not our bedroom? I thought you'd appreciate the space, he replied without emotion. This is a business arrangement after all. Your words, she nodded slowly. And what exactly are my duties in this arrangement? You'll accompany me to necessary social functions. The Holton Charity Gala is this Friday. Your first official appearance as Mrs. Riviera. His tone remained clinical. Otherwise, I expect discretion and appropriate behavior. That's all? That's all? Olivia couldn't help but laugh. No secret clause where I have to produce an heir within a year. For a moment, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Nothing so archaic, Ms. Winters. Still Winters? She interrupted. Force of habit, he conceded. Olivia, then. After he left, she explored her quarters, a luxurious suite larger than her entire apartment back home. Designer clothes filled the closet, none of which she had selected. Everything had been chosen for her, like she was another acquisition to be styled and displayed. By the third day, the penthouse's silence had become suffocating. Dominic left before dawn each morning and returned late, barely acknowledging her presence. The staff moved through the space like ghosts, efficient and distant. On Thursday morning, Olivia made her decision. She changed into jeans and a simple sweater from her old life, grabbed her laptop, and took a cab to Seabreeze Harbor. The community center was buzzing with activity for their weekly sustainable fishing workshop. When Olivia walked in, conversations halted as people stared at the returning local celebrity. Just because I married a billionaire doesn't mean I'm abandoning ship, she announced with a grin. Who's going to teach these workshops if I don't? For 5 blissful hours, Olivia felt like herself again, helping local fishermen learn about grant opportunities and sustainable practices. She was deep in conversation when her phone buzzed repeatedly. Mrs. Riviera, came the clipped voice of Dominic's assistant when she finally answered. Mr. Riviera is inquiring about your whereabouts. The stylist has been waiting for your fitting for the gala tomorrow. That evening, Dominic found her working at the dining table. Spreadsheets of community center budgets open before her. You went back to Seabreeze, he said. Not a question, I did, she replied without looking up. I'm still running my nonprofit. That wasn't part of our agreement. It wasn't excluded either, Olivia countered, finally meeting his gaze. I fulfilled my end of the bargain by marrying you. I never agreed to abandon everything that matters to me. Dominic studied her with those calculating gray eyes. The marriage needs to appear legitimate. Then perhaps you should have married someone who wants the life you're offering, she said evenly. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not, Dominic. Not for all the penthouse suites in Boston. To her surprise, he didn't argue further. The car will be here at 7 tomorrow evening. Please be ready. The Holton Gala was held in a historic mansion overlooking the Atlantic. Olivia wore the midnight blue gown the stylist had selected, though she'd refused the diamonds that had been delivered that afternoon. Instead, she wore her grandmother's simple pearl pendant, a reminder of who she really was. As they entered, Dominic placed his hand at the small of her back, leaning close to whisper, The Holtons contribute significantly to my development projects. Their goodwill is essential, Olivia nodded, understanding the subtext. Behave, be charming, play the part. For the first hour, she did exactly that, smiling politely through conversations about yacht clubs and investment portfolios. Then she noticed a small exhibition in the corner, photographs of coastal communities affected by recent hurricanes. Breaking away from Dominic's side, she approached a silver-haired woman studying the images. These are powerful, Olivia said genuinely. Is this part of the foundation's work? The woman turned, revealing a name tag that read, Margaret Holton. Indeed. Though most guests prefer the champagne to the photographs. Her eyes crinkled with warm interest. You're the new Mrs. Riviera, aren't you? Dominic mentioned you're from a coastal town yourself. He did? Olivia couldn't hide her surprise. For the next 30 minutes, she spoke passionately about sustainable coastal development and community resilience, subjects she knew intimately. Mrs. Holton listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, my dear, she finally said. We need more people like you involved in our foundation. Would you consider joining our Environmental Initiatives Committee? From across the room, Dominic watched this exchange with growing curiosity. He'd expected Olivia to endure the evening with polite discomfort. Instead, She was engaged in animated conversation with the most influential philanthropist in New England. Later, as they drove home, silence filled the car, until Dominic finally spoke. "Margaret Holton was impressed with you. She's doing important work. She rarely invites anyone onto her committee. It took me 3 years to secure a position for one of my executives." Olivia turned to look at the city lights reflecting off the harbor. "I didn't do it for your business interests. I did it because I care about those communities." Dominic was quiet for a moment. "I know," he finally said, so softly she almost missed it. The following Tuesday, Dominic returned to the penthouse earlier than usual. He paused in the doorway of Olivia's suite, watching as she typed furiously on her laptop. "I had my team draw these up," he said, placing a folder on her desk. Inside were legal documents establishing an endowment for her nonprofit, with no strings attached. Olivia looked up, genuinely surprised. "Why?" Dominic straightened his tie, seemingly uncomfortable with the question. "It's good business to support local initiatives. Helps with community relations for my developments." But as he turned to leave, Olivia caught a glimpse of something in his expression that didn't match his businesslike explanation, something that looked suspiciously like respect. The perfectly constructed facade was beginning to show its first hairline crack. The Garden Project. Morning light streamed through the penthouse windows as Olivia spread maps and photographs across Dominic's immaculate dining table. She had been waiting for this moment when he couldn't escape before his morning coffee. "What's all this?" Dominic asked, pausing with his espresso halfway to his lips. "The Harrison Street lot," Olivia replied, sliding a photograph toward him. "Your company acquired it last year. It's been sitting vacant." The image showed an abandoned lot in one of Seabreeze Harbor's struggling neighborhoods, overgrown with weeds, surrounded by chain-link fencing and covered with debris. "We're holding it for future development," he said dismissively. "The market timing isn't right yet." Olivia pushed forward a carefully prepared folder. "I have a proposal. Convert it into a community garden and educational space. The soil test came back clean. The location is walkable for 3 schools and the neighborhood has limited access to fresh produce." Dominic frowned, leafing through her meticulously researched plans. "This is a 7-figure property, Olivia." "Which is generating 0 return sitting empty," she countered. "Meanwhile, it's becoming a dumping ground and eyesore. This plan would create goodwill in a community where your company's reputation is less than stellar." His eyes narrowed. "You've been researching my business holdings?" "I've been researching my husband," she corrected, meeting his gaze steadily. "Know thy enemy, right?" Something that might have been admiration flickered across his face before he suppressed it. "And who would manage this garden?" "My development team doesn't exactly specialize in tomatoes and squash." "I would," Olivia said, "with community volunteers. Your company provides the land and initial infrastructure, raised beds, irrigation, a small pavilion. We handle the rest." Dominic studied the budget she'd included. "This is surprisingly reasonable." "I'm good with limited resources," she said. "Not everyone has billions to throw around." He set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "What's the real reason, Olivia? Why this project?" She hadn't expected the direct question. For a moment, her carefully constructed business case fell away. "Because people need more than luxury condos and yacht slips, Dominic. They need places to grow things, to teach their children where food comes from, to build community. When was the last time you created something that didn't increase your net worth?" The question hung between them, unexpectedly personal. Dominic's expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture shifted. "I'll have legal draw up temporary use permissions," he finally said. 3 months. Show me this isn't just a well-meaning disaster waiting to happen." 2 weeks later, Olivia stood at the Harrison Street lot watching a construction crew remove decades of debris. Beside her, surprisingly, stood Dominic, who had insisted on a site visit before final approval. "The neighborhood demographics don't match your usual investment profile," he observed, surveying the modest homes surrounding the lot. "That's exactly the point," Olivia replied. "Your developments typically displace communities like this. This project strengthens one instead." A small group of residents had gathered beyond the fence watching cautiously. Olivia waved them over, making introductions that Dominic hadn't expected. "This is Mrs. Patel. She's agreed to lead our herb garden section. She has incredible knowledge of medicinal plants from her homeland." The elderly woman nodded shyly. And this is Jorge, who's organizing the high school volunteer program. Dominic shook hands mechanically, clearly uncomfortable with the genuine humanity of the exchange. These weren't polished business associates or social elites, just ordinary people with dirt under their fingernails and hope in their eyes. "Mr. Riviera," said a small voice. Dominic looked down to find a girl of about 10 staring up at him. "Are you really going to let us grow food here?" Before he could formulate a corporate response, Olivia jumped in. "Yes, Zoe, he is. In fact, Mr. Riviera might even help us plant the first tree. Wouldn't you, Dominic?" Put on the spot, he could only nod. The girl beamed, revealing a missing front tooth. Over the following weeks, the garden took shape with remarkable speed. Raised beds were constructed, irrigation lines installed, and a modest pavilion erected for workshops and gatherings. Local businesses, hearing about the project, began donating materials and expertise. What surprised Dominic most was how often he found himself drawn to the site. He would claim to be checking on the investment, but increasingly found himself lingering, watching Olivia in her element, teaching composting workshops, organizing planting days, mediating the occasional dispute over garden plot boundaries. Here, away from the penthouse and boardrooms, she was transformed. Her hands were often dirty, her hair pulled back haphazardly, her clothes practical rather than fashionable. Yet she seemed more vibrant, more authentic than anyone in his usual circles. One Saturday afternoon in late spring, Dominic arrived unannounced to find the garden bustling with activity. Children darted between the rows of newly sprouting vegetables, volunteers constructed a rain collection system, and music played from a portable speaker. He spotted Olivia kneeling in the soil, helping an elderly man plant tomato seedlings. Her laughter carried across the garden as she gently guided his gnarled hands. "You must be the famous Mr. Riviera," said a voice beside him. He turned to find a middle-aged woman offering him a glass of lemonade. "I'm Helen, volunteer coordinator. Olivia's told us how you made all this possible." "Has she?" Dominic asked, surprised. "Oh yes. She says you have good business instincts but an underdeveloped sense of community." Helen smiled. Her words, not mine. Dominic found himself unexpectedly amused. "That sounds like her." "Well, we're grateful regardless of your motivations," Helen continued. "My grandson's school is using the garden for science classes now. First time he's been excited about education in years." When Olivia finally noticed him, she approached with a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "Checking up on your investment?" "Something like that," he replied. Then, surprising both of them, he added, "Need any help?" That afternoon, Dominic Riviera, whose Italian leather shoes alone cost more than most people's monthly salary, found himself planting raspberry bushes along the garden's northern fence. His jacket was carefully folded on a nearby bench, his shirt sleeves rolled up past his elbows. "You're doing it wrong," Olivia said, kneeling beside him. "Here." She covered his hands with her own, showing him how to properly spread the roots before covering them with soil. Her touch lingered longer than necessary, and when their eyes met, neither looked away immediately. As the sun began to set, they sat together on a newly constructed bench, surveying the day's progress. The garden was coming alive, not just with plants, but with purpose. "You were right," Dominic said quietly. "About what?" "Creating something that doesn't increase my net worth." He gestured to the thriving space around them. "I've built luxury high-rises that didn't generate the community response this simple garden has." Olivia studied him in the fading light. "Is that disappointing to the Great Harbor Shark?" "It's—" He searched for the right word. "Educational." Later that evening, as they rode back to the penthouse together, something that had never happened before, Dominic noticed Olivia still had that smudge of dirt on her cheek. Without thinking, he reached over and gently wiped it away with his thumb. The simple gesture hung between them, neither entirely sure what it meant. What had begun as a business proposition was quietly becoming something neither had anticipated, something organic and unplanned, growing like the seedlings in their garden. Storm warning. The weather alert buzzed on Olivia's phone at 3:17 a.m., jolting her from sleep. Hurricane Elaine had unexpectedly changed course and was now heading directly for the Massachusetts coast, with Seabreeze Harbor in its projected path. She was halfway dressed when a knock came at her door. Dominic stood in the hallway, already in a suit despite the early hour. "You've seen the forecast?" he asked. Olivia nodded, pulling her hair into a ponytail. "I need to get to Seabreeze. The community center is a designated shelter, but it needs to be prepared." To her surprise, Dominic didn't object. "I've called for the car. We leave in 10 minutes. My properties are at risk," he said simply. But something in his tone suggested there might be more to it than asset protection. Dawn was breaking as they arrived in Seabreeze Harbor. The normally picturesque town was transformed, storefronts boarded up, boats being secured in the marina, and residents hurrying through early preparations. The hurricane was still 36 hours away, but the sky already had an ominous yellow tinge. Dominic immediately pulled out his phone. "I need to check on the waterfront developments. My team should be implementing emergency protocols." "I'll be at the community center," Olivia replied, already heading toward the weathered building that served as her non-profit headquarters. By mid-morning, the center was buzzing with activity. Volunteers arranged cots, stockpiled water, and checked emergency supplies. Olivia moved through it all with practiced efficiency, having coordinated through smaller storms before. "The roof still leaks in the northwest corner," Patricia, her longtime volunteer coordinator, reported, "and we're short on backup power. The old generator won't handle the capacity if we're at maximum occupancy." Olivia bit her lip. "We'll have to prioritize. Medical equipment first, then minimal lighting. I've ordered 2 industrial generators," came Dominic's voice from the doorway. "They'll be here within 4 hours, along with additional supplies." Olivia turned in surprise. "Thank you," he nodded briskly. "My team is securing the harbor developments. I've also arranged hotel rooms inland for my key personnel." "What about everyone else?" Olivia asked. "The fishing families on the point? The service workers who keep your luxury properties running?" Dominic's expression remained neutral. "The evacuation order is clear. Anyone who can leave should." "With what resources?" Olivia challenged. "Do you think the dishwashers at your waterfront restaurants have evacuation funds set aside? Or vehicles capable of outrunning a hurricane?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I can't be responsible for every person in Seabreeze." "No, but you could help more than just your investments and executives," she countered, her voice rising. Around them, volunteers had paused their preparations, watching the confrontation unfold. Dominic took her elbow, guiding her toward a private office. Once the door closed, his controlled facade slipped slightly. "I'm already diverting significant resources here," he said, his voice tense. "The board will question these expenditures as it is." "Because human lives don't appear on the balance sheet?" Olivia challenged. "Don't simplify this," he snapped. "I'm running a corporation, not a charity, and I'm trying to save a community, one you've been happy to profit from." She crossed her arms. "The garden project was just for show, wasn't it? A convenient PR exercise while you wait to develop luxury condos." Something flashed in his eyes, hurt perhaps, though he quickly masked it. "Is that what you think? That everything is a calculated business move? Isn't it?" Olivia held his gaze. 3 months, Dominic. That was our agreement for the garden. What happens when the summer ends? You'll bulldoze those raspberry bushes we planted and break ground on another exclusive property that none of the locals can afford. The tension between them crackled like the approaching storm front. For months they had been building something undefined, a partnership, perhaps even the beginnings of a connection. Now, with the pressure of crisis, the fundamental differences in their worldviews were exposed. "I need to get back to the marina," Dominic finally said, his voice carefully controlled. "The generators will arrive by 2. As the day progressed, the weather deteriorated rapidly. Hurricane Elaine had intensified to Category 3, and the evacuation zone had expanded to include most of the coastal areas. By evening, wind was already bending trees and power flickered ominously. Olivia worked tirelessly at the community center, which was now filling with residents who had nowhere else to go. Elderly neighbors from the fishing district, families from the garden project neighborhood, service workers from the marina, all crowded into the building as rain began to lash against the windows. She hadn't seen Dominic since their morning confrontation. Occasionally she caught glimpses of his security team coordinating around town, but he remained absent from the shelter preparations. At 8:42 p.m., the power failed completely. The promised generators kicked in immediately, providing essential services but leaving much of the building in semi-darkness. Outside, the storm was building toward its peak, the wind now a constant roar. "Olivia," Patricia called from the main entrance. "You need to see this." Through the rain-streaked doors, Olivia saw headlights approaching. Not one vehicle, but a convoy. As they parked, she recognized the Riviera Development logo on the sides of several buses. Dominic stepped out of the lead vehicle, rain soaking his expensive suit in seconds. "What is this?" she asked, meeting him at the entrance. "Transportation," he replied, water streaming down his face. "For anyone who wants to evacuate inland. I've secured accommodation at 3 hotels in Worcester. My staff will coordinate." Before Olivia could respond, he continued, "I've also sent teams to the fishing district. Anyone still there is being brought here or evacuated." "You're helping them?" she asked, searching his expression in the dim emergency lighting. "I'm helping you," he corrected quietly. For a brief moment, neither spoke, the weight of his words hanging between them. Then the practical demands of the crisis took over as they worked to organize the new evacuation option. Some residents chose to leave on the buses, while others elected to weather the storm in the community center. Near midnight, with the hurricane now battering the town at full force, Olivia found Dominic standing alone by a window. Watching the storm's fury, "Why did you come back?" she asked. He didn't turn from the window. "I went to the garden after our discussion. It was already flooding." His voice remained even, but his hands were tightly clenched. "I saw the pavilion we built, the children's section with those ridiculous plant markers shaped like animals. All that work, about to be washed away. It can be rebuilt," Olivia said softly. "That's when I realized." He finally turned to face her. "I wasn't thinking about the property value or the investment. I was thinking about Zoe's face when she planted those sunflowers. About the elderly man with the tomatoes. About you, kneeling in the dirt, creating something meaningful from nothing." The emergency lights cast harsh shadows across his face, but couldn't hide the emotion he was finally allowing her to see. "All my life, I've built wealth by anticipating market trends," he continued, "but I missed something fundamental. Buildings, developments, property, they're nothing without the people who give them meaning." A tremendous crash outside punctuated his words as something large struck the building. The lights flickered ominously. "We should check the generator," Olivia said, practical concerns intruding on the moment. As they moved through the crowded shelter toward the utility room, Dominic suddenly reached for her hand. She hesitated only briefly before taking it, their fingers intertwining as they navigated the darkness together. Outside, Hurricane Elaine continued her destructive path, tearing at the foundations of Seabreeze Harbor. But within the storm, something else was taking shape. A bridge across the divide that had separated two people who had entered marriage as strangers but were now, finally, beginning to see each other clearly. Rebuilding together. Dawn broke over Seabreeze Harbor, revealing a transformed landscape. The hurricane had finally passed, leaving behind a wake of debris, flooded streets, and damaged buildings. The community center had survived largely intact, its reinforced roof holding despite the battering it had received. Olivia stood on the front steps, surveying the damage as exhausted residents began to emerge into the pale morning light. The harbor waters, usually so blue, were brown with churned-up sediment, dotted with fragments of docks and boats that hadn't been properly secured. Dominic appeared beside her, looking uncharacteristically disheveled after the sleepless night. His once immaculate suit was wrinkled, his hair tousled, stubble darkening his jaw. "It's worse than I expected," he said quietly. "But we're still standing," Olivia replied. "That counts for something." Their moment of shared reflection was brief. Soon they were both immersed in the immediate needs of the recovery, organizing search parties for damaged homes, coordinating with emergency services, distributing supplies that had been stockpiled before the storm. By mid-afternoon, Olivia found herself at the site of the community garden. The devastation was complete. Raised beds washed away, the small pavilion collapsed, and most of the carefully tended plants uprooted or buried under debris. A few community members stood at the chain-link fence surveying the loss with slumped shoulders. "All that work," sighed Helen, the volunteer coordinator. "Back to square one." Olivia was about to offer words of encouragement when a familiar voice spoke behind them. "Not square one," Dominic said. "Square two, at least." He approached with a group of people Olivia didn't recognize, men and women in practical clothing carrying tablets and surveying equipment. "Who are they?" she asked. "Landscape architects, civil engineers, urban agriculture specialists," Dominic replied, "the best I could find on short notice." Helen stared at him in confusion. "For a community garden?" "For the Seabreeze Community Resilience Project," he corrected. "If we're rebuilding, we're doing it properly. Flood-resistant design, sustainable irrigation, solar power. The garden will be just the beginning." Olivia studied his face, searching for the familiar signs of a business calculation. "This isn't in your company's development plan." "No," he agreed. "It's in ours." He held her gaze meaningfully. "If you'll partner with me on it." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by urgent calls from down the street. One of the historic buildings along the harbor, a century-old former cannery that had been converted to apartments, was showing signs of structural failure after the flooding. The next 3 days passed in a blur of emergency response. Olivia and Dominic rarely saw each other for more than passing moments, both throwing themselves into different aspects of the recovery. She coordinated community needs and volunteer efforts. He leveraged his company's resources to bring in equipment and expertise that the town desperately needed. On the 4th evening, Olivia returned to the community center, now serving as recovery headquarters, to find a handwritten note asking her to meet Dominic at the marina at sunset. She found him standing at the end of a damaged pier, looking out over the harbor where cleanup vessels were still working to remove debris from the water. "I've been avoiding you," he admitted without preamble as she approached. "I noticed," Olivia replied. "Why?" He turned to face her, the setting sun casting long shadows between them. "Because I needed to be certain of my motivations before having this conversation." "And are you?" "Certain?" Dominic nodded, then gestured for her to follow him. They walked along the harbor to a small, weathered building that had once been the harbormaster's office. Inside, the walls were covered with plans, maps, and architectural renderings, a vision for Seabreeze Harbor unlike anything she had seen before. "What is this?" Olivia asked, moving closer to examine the details. "A different kind of development," Dominic explained. "Affordable housing built to withstand future storms. An expanded community center with emergency capabilities. Commercial spaces designed for local businesses, not chain stores. Public access to the waterfront, not just private marinas." Olivia traced her finger along one of the renderings, a reimagined version of the garden project, now expanded to include an educational center and farmers market. "This isn't the harbor shark I know," she said softly. "No," Dominic agreed. "It's not." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the evening chill. "When my parents arranged this marriage, all I saw was a business opportunity," he continued. "Seabreeze was just another acquisition, undervalued property in a prime location. You were part of the package deal, the local connection that would smooth the way for my development plans." Olivia winced slightly at the bluntness of his assessment, but he pressed on. "What I never expected was to find someone who would challenge every assumption I've built my empire upon, someone who could see past my wealth to my poverty of purpose." "Dominic," she began, but he gently placed his fingers against her lips. "Let me finish. Please." His voice had lost its typical confidence, revealing an unfamiliar vulnerability. "The night of the hurricane, watching you work tirelessly for people who have nothing material to offer you, I finally understood what I've been missing. My whole life, I've been accumulating wealth without creating value, real value, the kind that makes communities stronger." He took her hands in his, a gesture that would have been unimaginable months ago. "I don't expect you to love me, Olivia. Our beginning was too transactional for that. But I'm asking if you'll work with me, truly partner with me, to rebuild Seabreeze into something better than it was before. Not as my trophy wife, but as my equal." Olivia studied his face in the fading light, seeing sincerity in eyes that once had calculated only profit margins. "This transformation," she said carefully, "is it just about the hurricane? About Seabreeze?" Dominic shook his head. "It's about you. The way you look at the world, seeing potential where I saw only property values. The way you've built connections with people I would have overlooked. The way you've remained true to yourself despite everything." He hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic uncertainty, I think I've fallen in love with you." not with the idea of you or what you represent. With you, stubborn community organizer, garden enthusiast and all, the confession hung in the air between them. For a moment, Olivia said nothing, processing the journey that had brought them from arranged marriage to this unexpected crossroads. Love wasn't part of our arrangement, she finally said. No, he agreed. It was the unforeseen consequence. Outside, the harbor lights began to come on as emergency crews continued their work. Life was returning to Seabreeze, different but undefeated. I'm not sure I can trust this change in you, Olivia admitted. Business empires aren't dismantled overnight. Old habits don't disappear with one epiphany. I know, Dominic said. That's why I'm not asking for your trust immediately. I'm asking for the chance to earn it day by day, decision by decision. He gestured to the plans surrounding them. This is just the beginning. I want to rebuild more than buildings, Olivia. I want to rebuild myself with you beside me, if you'll stay. If I'll stay, she repeated thoughtfully. You know, when I agreed to this marriage, I thought I was sacrificing my freedom. I never imagined I might find a partner instead of a jailer. She moved closer to him, close enough that she could feel his breath against her face. I'm not in love with you, Dominic, not yet. But I'm open to the possibility. Something shifted in his expression, hope mixed with determination. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down to kiss her. Unlike their formal kiss at their wedding ceremony, this one was genuine, tentative at first, then deepening as Olivia responded. When they finally parted, the last light of day had faded from the sky. So, Dominic said, his voice slightly unsteady. Partners? Partners, Olivia agreed. But on one condition. Name it. We live here in Seabreeze, not in that sterile penthouse. If we're rebuilding this community, we need to be part of it. Dominic's smile transformed his face, erasing the hard lines of the businessman she had first met. I was thinking the same thing. The old Wellington house on the bluff survived the storm. With some renovations and a garden, Olivia added. And a very large garden, he agreed. It could be home. 6 months later, Seabreeze Harbor was transformed. The scars of Hurricane Elaine remained, but alongside them were signs of renewal and growth. The community garden had been rebuilt, larger and more resilient than before. Construction had begun on mixed-income housing along the waterfront, designed with both climate resilience and community needs in mind. The center of it all was the unlikely partnership that had grown from a marriage of convenience into something neither Olivia nor Dominic could have imagined. Their differences remained. She still challenged his business instincts. He still occasionally slipped into calculating mode. But those differences had become strengths rather than divisions. On the anniversary of their arranged wedding, they stood together in their new garden, planting a young apple tree that would take years to bear fruit. A year ago, I thought I was sacrificing my future, Olivia said, patting soil around the sapling's roots. And I thought I was securing mine, Dominic replied, his hand covering hers in the earth. We were both wrong in the best possible way. As the setting sun painted the harbor in gold, they stood side by side, watching the community they were building together. What had begun as a business transaction had blossomed into something far more valuable. A partnership rooted in respect, grown through challenge and finally flowering into love. The garden, like their marriage, would require constant tending. There would be storms and droughts, seasons of abundance and times of hardship, but they would face them together, their roots now deeply intertwined in the community they both called home.